I'm Detective James, and this is the cases the news forgot.
When I entered the neighborhood, I already knew how many children were supposed to live there. 23. I had their names printed in a folder on the seat beside me. Birth certificates, school registrations, pediatric records. Years of paperwork proving those kids had laughed in these streets, ridden bikes on these sidewalks, slept in these homes. But when I started knocking on doors, every family told me the same thing. They had never had children. No accidents, no illnesses, no runaways, just absence, clean, corrected. As if someone had carefully removed an entire generation and wiped the fingerprints afterward. The toys were gone, bedrooms remodeled, photos replaced. Even the language had changed. No one said any more. They said never. And the worst part was this. They weren't lying. I've interviewed liars for most of my life. I know how guilt moves in the face, and how rehearsed answers arrive too quickly, how grief leaks through even the best performance. This wasn't that. These people were calm, confused, concerned for me. One mother actually apologized. She thought I must have the wrong street, but she said it while standing in front of a garage wall carved with pencil lines marking a child's height year after year. A chart she somehow could not see, because in this neighborhood, remembering a child was the one thing you weren't allowed to do. And tonight, someone finally did. I parked near the cul-de-sac and stepped out into the quiet. Even the wind felt edited. Porches were lit. Television glow flickered through curtains. Dishes clinked. A dog barked somewhere behind a fence. Normal sounds, adult sounds, but there were gaps where other noises should have been. No shouting, no laughter, no running feet. I checked the time, 6:12 p.m., early evening, peak hour for families, yet the streets belonged to no one under 4 feet tall. A basketball hoop stood over a driveway 3 houses down. No ball. The net moved slightly in a breeze too weak to touch anything else. I opened my folder. House by house. Names of parents. Names of children. I chose the nearest one. The man who answered wore reading glasses and an expression of polite patience, like he had already dealt with telemarketers today and was prepared for one more inconvenience. I introduced myself. Asked if he had a moment. He nodded. I asked how long he and his wife had lived here. Almost 10 years, he said. Good place to raise a family. He smiled warmly. We enjoy the peace. I opened the folder and read a name. Daniel, I said. Born 2015. The man's smile faltered, not in fear, in confusion. I'm sorry, he said gently. That's not us. I tried another. Sophie, 2018. He shook his head. You must have the wrong address. Behind him, on the entryway table, sat a framed photograph. The couple on a beach. Both leaning inward, arms curved, holding something between them, something the image refused to display. Like the space itself had been blurred by reality. I asked if I could take a closer look. He handed it to me willingly. He saw nothing wrong. I walked the street for an hour. Every house the same. Friendly, cooperative, absolutely certain. No children had ever lived here. Yet evidence kept surfacing in small, stubborn ways. A drawer in one kitchen that only contained plastic cups with cartoon animals. A minivan with crushed crackers embedded deep into the seats. Finger paint stains beneath new coats of beige. Things erased from memory, but not from matter. Like reality had obeyed an order halfway. Halfway down the block, I found the bus stop. Fresh yellow paint. reflective sign polished. Maintenance records updated last week for children who did not exist. I took photos, documented everything, and the longer I stayed, the more I began to feel it. The neighborhood wasn't unaware. It was invested. There was a tension in the windows now. Curtains shifted, doors closed softly. Not to hide, to protect something fragile. A version of life everyone had agreed to maintain. At house number 12, I met resistance. The woman who opened the door looked tired, not old, just worn thin in a way that suggested sleep wasn't doing its job anymore. When I asked about children, her eyes watered instantly. Her lips trembled. For a second, I thought I'd broken through. "I can't," she whispered. "Can't what?" But then she blinked, and it was gone, smoothed away. "I'm sorry," she said, embarrassed. "I don't know why that upset me." I asked if she would mind if I stepped inside. She hesitated longer than the others. Then she let me. The house was immaculate. Too immaculate. Like a place staged for sale, not living. Family photos lined the hallway. In 3 of them, she knelt with arms open toward empty air. Joy in her face, waiting for someone who had been removed from existence. I felt my stomach tighten. "Who were you smiling at?" I asked carefully. She studied the picture. "I don't know," she whispered. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms and an office, except the office had glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling, carefully arranged. Loved. She followed my eyes upward. Her breathing changed. "I don't remember doing that," she said, but she said it like someone standing at the edge of a memory she was terrified to approach. Then we both heard it, from somewhere outside. Metal scraping, a garage door opening. Slow, unwilling, and from inside, someone crying, not loudly, the kind of crying you do when you've been holding it in for a very, very long time. The woman grabbed my arm. "Please," she said, "don't go over there." "Why?" Her answer came too fast, because she already knew it. "Because if someone remembers," she said, "the neighborhood changes." And the crying didn't stop. The crying didn't stop. It trembled through the evening air, thin and exhausted, like it had been happening for a long time and had simply run out of strength to hide. No one else came outside. No porch lights flicked on. No doors opened. The neighborhood had perfected the art of not noticing. The woman still held my arm. Her fingers dug in harder than she realized. "Please," she whispered again. "If someone's remembering, it won't let them." "Won't let who?" I asked, but she shook her head before the question could live. People here did that a lot. They erased their own sentences mid-thought, like language itself was under supervision. I stepped off the porch. She didn't follow, but she didn't go back inside either. She just stood there, shivering, waiting to see which version of reality would win. The garage belonged to the house at the end of the cul-de-sac. Single story, blue shutters. Welcome mat that read, "Home is everything." The door had risen halfway and stopped, juddering against its track as if the motor wasn't sure it should continue. The crying came from inside. I called out, "Hello?" The sound paused, then came again, sharper now, panicked. Not because of me, because of what my arrival meant. I bent and slipped under the half-open door. The interior light buzzed overhead. Boxes stacked high. Seasonal decorations, old tools. And sitting on the concrete floor, back against the wall, was a man in his late 30s. He clutched something to his chest. A backpack, small, pink, decorated with cartoon rabbits. He looked at me like a drowning person looks at land. "You see it too," he said. Not a question. Relief. I nodded. Tell me what's happening, I said. He laughed, but it broke halfway through. They said it was stress, he whispered. They said I was inventing her because my wife and I couldn't have kids. He opened the backpack with shaking hands. Inside were school papers, drawings, permission slips. Everyone signed, everyone official, all dated, all real, except according to the world outside this garage, none of them belonged to anyone. What's her name? I asked. He hesitated, and I watched the fight happen. Memory pushing forward, pressure pushing back. If forgetting had a gravity, I could see it pulling at him. Finally, he forced it out. Lena, he said. The moment he spoke it, the overhead light flickered. Outside, somewhere on the street, a door slammed. I remembered yesterday, he rushed. I found the backpack in the attic. My wife said it wasn't ours, but I knew the zipper. I knew the smell of her shampoo. I knew how heavy she felt when she fell asleep on my chest. Tears ran down his face. I remembered the way she said my name. The garage seemed smaller now, air tighter, like the neighborhood had leaned closer to listen. What happened after you remembered? I asked. He swallowed. People came. Who? He shook his head. I don't know. Neighbors, maybe, but different, calm, smiling. They told me it would pass. They said memory can be contagious. Contagious. The word settled badly. What did they want you to do? Sleep, he whispered. Of course. Sleep. Reset. Return to compliance. And your wife? I asked. He stared at the driveway. She begged me, he said. She said if I loved her, I would stop. Stop loving Lena. That was the translation. I crouched beside him. Why open the garage? I asked. He looked embarrassed. Because if I stayed inside, he said, I was going to forget again. The honesty of it hurt. He had come here to be exposed, to be seen. Witness creates reality. Maybe he thought if someone else looked at the evidence, it couldn't be taken from him again. That's when we heard footsteps. Not running, measured, several people approaching together. I glanced outside. Neighbors, 4 of them, walking side by side, expressions gentle, concerned, like visiting someone in a hospital. The woman from earlier stood on her porch, crying quietly. She knew this part. The man grabbed my sleeve. They'll talk to you, he said urgently. They'll make it sound reasonable, like grief counseling, like healing. The neighbors stopped at the driveway. One of them spoke. Sir, he called to me, polite but firm. You shouldn't be here right now. I stood. Why? Because he's confused, the man said kindly, and confusion spreads. I looked back at the father. He was shaking his head, terrified, clutching the backpack like it might evaporate. I realized something then. This neighborhood didn't remove children. It removed the damage of losing them. Whatever had happened, whatever event had taken 23 kids, the forgetting wasn't cruelty. It was anesthesia, manufactured mercy, and I had just ripped it open. Sir, the neighbor said again, stepping closer, we can help him. The group nodded, united, practiced. How? I asked. With rest, he said. Always rest, because sleep was the door memory used to leave. The father screamed, Don't let them take it, he shouted at me. But they weren't reaching for the bag. They were reaching for him, and every house on the street turned its lights on at once. The father's voice was raw, shaking the silence of the garage. They were here, he whispered. Every one of them. And then they weren't. And it's my fault I forgot. I looked at him, trying to understand. "Your fault?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Because I remembered too late. Because I couldn't stop the forgetting. I should have protected them." I didn't know what to say. But then I noticed it. Subtle things that made the blood run colder. The walls of the garage weren't normal. Every surface bore faint imprints of tiny hands, as if someone had pressed against them and vanished. Dust displaced in impossible patterns. Footprints that led nowhere. I realized the moment I looked at the backpack again. It wasn't just papers. It smelled faintly of shampoo, baby lotion, crayon wax, and tears. Memory. That smell itself seemed to defy erasure. Then the neighbors moved. They didn't walk fast. They didn't shout. They came silently, closing in, encircling us. Smiles polite, almost too calm. "Sir," one said, voice soothing, "you should not see this." "What is happening here?" I asked. "You are not meant to know," the neighbor replied. "It's safer this way." "Safer? For who?" I pressed. He didn't answer. Instead, the father grabbed my arm again. "Listen," he said, voice trembling. "If you look outside, really look, you'll understand." I stepped to the doorway. The street stretched before me, perfectly straight. Mailboxes aligned, lawns neat. No children. Then I noticed them. Tiny shadows flitting in the periphery of my vision. Quick, too fast to focus. Always disappearing the moment I tried to follow. I turned to ask the father, but he was kneeling, whispering to the backpack. "Lena," he said softly, "don't forget. Please don't forget." It was then I understood. The children weren't gone entirely. Not really. They existed in fragments, memories embedded in objects, in walls, in the air itself, and the neighborhood. The neighborhood was a living memory machine. Every adult, every parent had agreed silently to erase the children from conscious thought, to protect them, or perhaps themselves, from the pain of what had happened. But someone like me, an outsider, could destabilize the system. I felt the air grow heavy. Time slowed. My own memories of children, nieces, nephews, friends, cousins, all the moments I had once taken for granted, flooded back at once, unbidden, almost violently. I staggered. "You're destabilizing it," one of the neighbors said quietly. "You don't understand what comes next." Then the crying started again, louder, more insistent. But this time I realized it wasn't just coming from the garage. It was coming from every house on the block, every window, every corner. A chorus of sound, fragmented and mournful, echoing across a neighborhood that didn't want to hear it. The father shouted at me, voice breaking, "You have to leave. If you stay here, it will reach you too." "What will?" I asked, my heart hammering. "The forgetting, or the remembering, or both. It doesn't matter which. It only matters that balance is kept. If you keep remembering, it spreads and it destroys the system." I didn't move. I couldn't. Then the garage door slammed shut behind me. The crying stopped. Absolute silence followed, and then the lights went out. For the first time, the neighborhood was in darkness. I felt the presence behind me. Adults, neighbors all around, not hostile but guiding. "Sleep," they said as one voice, though each mouth moved separately. Sleep to forget, sleep to comply, sleep to survive. I realized in that moment that the system wasn't cruel. It was necessary. Not for the children, but for the adults, for the neighborhood, for the fragile thread of memory that allowed life to continue without breaking entirely. And yet, someone somewhere, like the father, refused. The consequence was immediate. The floor beneath him shivered slightly. A low hum vibrated through the walls, almost imperceptible, like the neighborhood itself warning him to relent. I wanted to help him, but the moment stretched, heavy with tension, as if time itself had slowed to watch. Finally, the father whispered, almost to himself, "I remember everything. I can't forget." And that's when the first real anomaly appeared. A child's shadow crossed the street. Not a trick of light, not a ghost. Solid, moving, laughing faintly. No one else saw it except me and the father. He gasped, his hands shook. "It's not too late," he said. "They're still here. Somehow, they're still here." Then the shadows multiplied. Tiny forms darting behind curtains, between cars, along fences, too fast to count, too quick to focus. And the neighborhood responded. Lights flickered on, curtains snapped shut, doors locked quietly. Adults appeared, standing at thresholds, watching silently. Not angry, not hostile, protective. The balance was being tested, and I knew then the truth. This neighborhood had survived decades, perhaps centuries, by forgetting, and those who remembered became dangerous. Not just to themselves, but to the fragile reality that had been maintained. And the father turned to me, voice trembling but resolute. "If they take the children completely, it will erase them. But if we keep remembering, it will erase us." And for the first time, I understood the impossible choice. Forget or remember. Neither safe, both necessary. The air thickened, shadows danced, and the crying began again, louder, everywhere. The shadows moved faster now. They were no longer fleeting shapes in the corner of my eye. Solid, present. Small hands brushing against fences, bikes left untouched on driveways, tiny footprints appearing and disappearing in the dew of the evening. The father gripped my arm. "Do you see them?" he whispered, voice trembling. "They're still here. Somehow. They survived." I could feel the neighborhood watching. Every house, every lighted window, every subtle movement seemed to focus on us. There was no hostility, only awareness. Then I realized the neighborhood itself was alive, not in the way a city is alive with traffic or chatter, alive in a deeper sense. Every family, every adult, a neuron in a vast, fragile organism, and memory, remembering, was the current that could shock it. The father knelt on the concrete, clutching the backpack, and slowly opened it again. Papers fluttered in the slight breeze of the garage. Drawings, school reports, photos, handprints of little fingers, everything intact, everything real. "We have to restore them," he said firmly. "If I don't, they will vanish forever." I wanted to argue, to warn him, but the moment had gone beyond reason. The shadows condensed. Tiny figures took shape. A girl with a crooked braid, a boy holding a tattered soccer ball, another child clutching a stuffed rabbit. Their eyes didn't meet mine directly, but I could feel recognition, memory, life itself pulsing from them. The adults on the street moved closer, not to stop us, not to punish, but to enforce the rule. "You can't do this," one said softly. "Once remembered, it cannot be undone, and if the balance breaks, the neighborhood will correct itself, painfully." I understood immediately. Forgetting was protection. Remembering was rebellion. The father looked at me. "I don't care. They belong somewhere. They exist. And if I forget them, they are gone forever." He began placing the papers, drawings, and photos on the garage floor, forming a rough circle. A ritual? Perhaps. I didn't have time to question it. Then the first child stepped forward. Real, solid, blinking in the dim garage light. "Daddy?" she asked softly. The father's knees buckled. He reached for her, and in that instant, everything changed. Lights flickered across the neighborhood. Curtains snapped open and closed. Shadows twisted. The air vibrated with static energy, like a storm contained beneath a glass dome. The children's shapes multiplied. They ran along fences, through yards, laughing, crying, playing, but only I and the father could see them. The adults surrounding us were still calm, still polite, but I could feel the strain in the atmosphere. They were holding a tension in place that could snap at any moment. "I warned you," the neighbor said, voice cold and soft. "This is the cost of remembering." The father's hands shook as he held his daughter. The backpack slipped from his knees and spilled across the floor. Drawings, photos, letters scattered. Each one seemed to hum with memory. Then the crying started. Not human, not childlike. It was the sound of years of suppressed grief, loss, and absence. It reverberated through the walls, through the streets, through the neighborhood. The father clutched the girl tighter. "It's okay. I remember you. I won't let them erase you." Something shifted. The neighborhood softened. The adults stepped back. They were no longer guardians of forgetting, but witnesses, observers, and for a fleeting second the rules seemed suspended. The children smiled. One reached for me. I stepped back. Too real, too present. Then a voice, firm, cold, collective, rose from every door, every porch, every window. "Memory must obey, or it will be removed." A pause. The shadows flickered violently, like a candle in the wind. The children began to waver, their forms becoming translucent. Fragile. The father screamed, "No!" And I realized the neighborhood system was reasserting itself. It could not allow remembering to persist. Not fully. And then a compromise occurred. The children solidified, but only partially. Visible to the father, visible to me, not to the others. Their existence was a secret. Protected, but hidden. The neighborhood's balance maintained. The father collapsed, holding his daughter tightly. He looked at me, tears streaming. They exist, but no one else can see. They're safe, but trapped between worlds. Between memory and forgetting, between being and not being. The shadows dispersed. The crying ended. The night air grew still again. The adults returned to their houses. Curtains closed. The lights dimmed. The neighborhood resumed its calm, curated silence. And the father whispered, almost to himself, "We remember, so they can exist, but only we remember." I left that street with a chill I can't shake, a place where children lived, and yet did not, where memory is law and forgetting is survival. I never spoke of it outside that block. No photographs left the street. No one else can confirm what I saw. But the backpack, the drawings, the children exist, somewhere, waiting to be remembered again. And I know this. If someone else comes, someone who truly sees, the balance will be tested once more.